Hello and welcome to another edition of the Motion Racing Podcast. I'm Sascha and welcome again to Georgie Mackay, who, this is becoming a bit of a routine. Hello, Georgie. It's nice to see you again. How are you doing?
Hi, Sascha.
I was entertained by a thoroughly good Formula E race. I was also entertained by all of the news and drama around Max Verstappen in GT3, and I'm always entertained by sim racing. So I'm hoping we can talk about that later on as well.
There was the Sebring 12 hour as well.
Yeah, and plenty of people getting on IMSA's back about the BOP at that race.
You know, Jess, for those of you that don't know, viewers, I'm referencing Jamie Jessica Martin, the team principal of Prismatic Motorsports. She was on her high horse yesterday about, Porsche, we look at how we do and the BOP favours us. Because, of course, they've pulled out of WEC for quote-unquote unfavourable BOP. Yeah, it is interesting. You can sort of see where people come from when they win almost every race in IMSA, but then are awful in WEC. But at the same time, it's not often I reference Christian Horner, but change a car.
Yep, I think he said more than that, but yes, I agree with you.
He did say more than that.
And, well, Sebring, such a classic circuit and so much fun to drive on Forza Motorsport as well. I think it might be purely for the old airfield strip and those concrete slats, but it's something you don't get really on any race circuit, well, potentially excluding Indianapolis with the brickworks now.
It's one of those really old school, bumpy as hell tracks. I've no problem going on record and I'll defend this take until I die. Sebring is my favorite track. I love it whenever it comes up. We've got the Sebring 12 hour in iRacing next weekend, and I can't wait for that. I've just started practicing for that this week as well. So, you know, I'm always happy to see Sebring on the calendar, and it's been great to see these new generation of GTP cars driving around them as well. We've got ostensibly some of the most successful prototype sports cars we've ever had in racing. Some of the best tracks there are in racing. I think WEC's fantastic. IMSA's fantastic at the moment. It's really great to see what they've done over there.
Absolutely, and maybe we should even spend some time talking about sports car racing in a bit more depth, and particularly the new generation of hypercar or GTP car, because, you know, it's probably the most fun racing aesthetically to watch because every shape is different and there are so many different things to enjoy. Like if one car's streaking out ahead in GTP or in hypercar, you can go to GT3 and you can actually support, you know, brands based on cars that you might see on the road one day, and it's so enjoyable. And we should definitely cover that as well before, obviously, Race for a Cause 24 in April. So, you know, with Formula E taking a break for a month, we can actually afford to do a bit of non-Formula E stuff, and there's plenty out there in motorsport to cover. So hopefully we'll have some fun with that in April.
Season roundup of IMSA so far, perhaps?
That could be interesting. Yeah, maybe a bit of, I mean, obviously the WEC in Bahrain got cancelled, but maybe a look at this season's WEC as well. That would be fun. Yeah, and I can think of a couple of people who'd like to come on and talk about that too. So we might have a third window for that one.
Wait with bated breath, dear viewer.
Super. Okay, so I think we ought to start with a follow-up from the last pod. So we talked about the Evo sessions last time. That is, for any new listeners or viewers, the attempt to get YouTubers involved in Formula E and then to get their fans to engage and watch it. And it went fairly well, but not for the reasons perhaps that they intended. So, for example, someone like Rory Sutherland would probably get clipped up on TikTok saying what an amazing piece of marketing this was. And I think, to be fair, I might have said the same thing last time. So Izzy Hammond, Richard Hammond's daughter, of course, went into the wall, in my opinion, partly because she wasn't going quickly enough for brake-by-wire to work, but that's not been confirmed. And it was one of the largest accidents of any Gen 3 car. And, while the components were sourced by Formula E operations afterwards, it's not clear who directly paid for the damage. And also, lowly Yamaha, of course, had to get to work rebuilding that car. They also admitted that the replacement tub that they sourced was the final ever Gen 3 car built by Spark Racing Technologies. So they're kind of lucky they didn't have 2 monster crashes during the Evos, aren't they?
Yeah, when you say that, that is a bit, but I think there's been a lot of speculation online, which is to say I haven't really been looking at things like Twitter, but I think there's been a lot of speculation online that it was potentially the Saudi investment fund or the Saudi government effectively that paid for that in some sort of roundabout way through a subsidiary company or whatever. And I know that sounds relatively conspiracy theory or conspiratorial, perhaps is a better word, but it doesn't seem that far removed from the truth, though, does it? When they are already involved in sports. I said earlier to you pre-call that one of the main reasons I support Aston Villa is because when I was choosing who to support, it was between them or Newcastle, and I didn't really like the whole sports washing approach that the Newcastle ownership model has. I'll leave it at that. But I think, there must have been something similar going on in Jeddah for the Evo sessions. There must have been some sort of guarantorship of costs incurred there. Otherwise, why would they run the session there? As we discussed on the last podcast, there wasn't really anyone there to watch it. So it wasn't to draw public crowds, it was to draw the online crowds. And I think we were all aware of that. There were influencers that were in the cars anyway, so it was very clearly going for online audiences. But for me, it doesn't make sense unless the people that are putting the event on are at least guaranteeing some sort of level of costs for an event like that. I don't even think that's necessarily conspiratorial. I think that just sort of makes sense,
Yeah, potentially. And but by the way, the idea of having no crowds for motorsport and the audience being entirely the televisual audience or the broadcast audience was a dream of Bernie Ecclestone's when he bought Circuit du Castellet, I think it is, a Paul Ricard. He planned for it to be a race circuit with no grandstands. The idea being that if he ever got Formula One to go there, then there'd be no need for grandstands because it would be an entirely televisual affair. Of course, things moved on a lot since then, but I almost feel like Formula E in Saudi Arabia can sometimes feel like that anyway. But yeah, I mean, if you're hosting it and if you've specifically asked to host the Evo sessions because of the potential engagement possibilities, then it makes sense to subsidise it. And I would just like to think that a smaller team like Abs Lola Yamaha was not having to pay those costs out of pocket. I don't think they were.
I certainly don't think so either, is probably the best place to leave that.
Yeah. But Frederick Espinos of Lola, the team principal there, said, according to the Hyphen Race, we had to reschedule the timing of everyone and people had to cancel their holidays. But this is where, as a racing team, nobody was complaining and nobody was doing anything except how to make it possible and do their best to rebuild Zane Maloney's car. So, I mean, it's nice that they have that togetherness. I'm sure that some people were complaining, probably the partners and children of the people who cancelled their holidays, but nonetheless, the result was there to see. They finished Zane's car just in time for FP, and Zane Maloney got out there and performed again. So, well done to the people at Lola Yamaha, I would say.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to their commitment to the sport, to the team, to each other, the whole operation they have going on over there. I mean, I know and I've got no problem going on record to say this, if my employer watches this, they already know I feel this way. If the place was burning down, I would not drive in to save it, but it really does seem that the team at Lola really pulled together to put that car back together, or to put the new car together, as it were. And it was great to see. Obviously, yes, there will have been a lot of people that were a bit miffed about having to move their holidays, but ultimately it's that or park the car for a race to get it solved, and that's probably worse in the long term.
I think it would have looked extremely bad to Formula E operations if a team had to park their car due to what was meant to be a fun thing.
Yeah, exactly. Especially like in context of, well, why couldn't they get it back out in the amount of time that there was? why couldn't another one be produced? Because the question wouldn't be why couldn't one be produced? One could be produced in that amount of time. It would be why wasn't it? And the only reason would have been cost. So it is good to see that, or rather to infer that organization was probably helped with the costs of getting that car back together.
Yeah. So we move on from YouTuber drama to Jarama, and very happy to go to the historic circuit outside of Madrid. It was called the Madrid E-Prix because why not? But I personally was glad to see it go to this classic venue from 70s F1 lore and 80s F1 lore. It was very much the circuit used every year right up until Jerez, and then Barcelona took over from it. But yeah, excellent track. And it was nice to see Formula E not being coddled, as in Formula E cars not being coddled. As in, I think people now know that Gen 3 is quick enough to handle most things. And it can race on full Formula One spec circuits without any modification. So it was nice to see a circuit with a very fast uphill incline section being used in Formula E and, being handled by those cars with no problem. It does make a difference when you're trying to broadcast a race, when you've got some difference in camber, some difference in undulation, and Jarama had all those things. I mean, when you go to these classic circuits, and I still think of Zandvoort in the same way, you do get this feeling of, the track designers back then didn't have computers to work with, but they all had amazing imaginations, didn't they?
Absolutely. I've said before that my favorite track on the calendar in Formula E is the Monaco E-Prix, and I think Jarama's up there in a similar way. It's just one of those old school tracks, like we talked about Sebring a minute ago. It's just old, it's bumpy, it was put together by someone that was using what they had, not what a computer generated for them to be the most optimal way of conserving energy around a track to make sure the cars got around. That's one problem for Formula E nowadays, or was in the early days when we saw, I remember, was it in the XL in London? I hated that track. It felt like a glorified go-kart track. But nowadays we see real proper caliber racing tracks for Formula E. It is really heartening to see.
I think with the XL, the thing was that they had to find a venue that wouldn't be protested, and you know what Londoners are like. Battersea Park went off the schedule partly because the track wasn't great, but also partly because it kept being protested, and no one's going to protest anything that happens in the XL arena, I guess was the thinking.
At that point, why does it even have to be in London? But anyway, that's a much more, like, I live in Scotland, for those of you that don't know, so that's a take that probably isn't much of a it's not news that I would have that to people that know me. I would say, hold it in Manchester, hold it in Birmingham, hold it in Glasgow. You don't have to put everything in London. London's not the only city in the UK. Well, but anyway, by the by.
So the Birmingham Super Prix, the Formula 3000 race, okay, it wasn't successful because it was way too dangerous. But, it goes to show you can hold a street race in Birmingham, and I'm sure with modern safety standards it could work.
Figure it out. Yeah. That's what I'll say to the track builders of the world is, if you really want to stake your name on something in the UK, make a street circuit that's not in London. There are so many controversial, better cities in the UK than London, especially for their scenery. Edinburgh would make a fantastic street circuit, but it's whether the Edinburgh Council would let you close the streets for a day or 2 days or 3 days. Anyway, we go back to things that are outside of the remit of this podcast. No one needs to know my issues with the Scottish council system.
Actually, we'd love to. Maybe we'll have time later on.
Well, let me just say 4 weeks is not often enough to take the bins out.
Well, okay. So, Jarama, good addition, and I think we needed a Formula E race in Spain as well. Alberto Longo kind of alluded to this on the grid. He was so proud to finally get a Formula E race. I think I'm right in saying his home city, Madrid, and he seemed actually quite emotional, and he was very happy as well, obviously, that you've got a Spanish brand Cupra with a Spanish driver, Pepe Marti, on the grid, and who, of course, led some of the race. He did say he'd be crying if Marti won the race. That didn't happen, but maybe we don't need to see too many grown men crying. But yeah, nonetheless, nice for him, and nice for, I think, Formula E to be in Spain. However, there was a bit of drama off track going on while we prepared for Madrid, a letter was uncovered by the Hyphen Race again about Formula E stewarding, and it was pretty incendiary anyway. I'll just read you some of this letter. It was to Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the FIA president. He starts off by saying, "We write to you collectively as the undersigned drivers of the Formula E World Championship." So it was sent from Oliver Rowland and Lucas de Grassi, the sort of drivers' reps, but it was sent by all drivers on the grid. And it talks about, after multiple on-track incidents, post-race reviews and several discussions with stewards and race directors, we feel compelled to elevate these concerns to your office. And then they've got several sections: inconsistency in decision-making and penalty application, with, they say, similar racing incidents resulting in materially different penalties, lack of continuity in stewarding panels, frequent changes in the composition of stewarding panels have led to divergent interpretations, and driver advisors and champion-specific expertise. Now, that's a general point about how they feel that as Formula One has a driver steward, Formula E, being a very specialised sport these days, requires either an ex-Formula E driver or someone maybe with an FIA licence to step in and be part of the stewarding team there. Can't say I argue with that at all. And finally, race director logic, leadership, communication and transparency. So this is a point about the FIA race director Marek Hanaszewski, who they feel is too quick to double down on decisions, doesn't communicate properly to the drivers and teams, and doesn't demonstrate, it says, this is the most cutting part, sufficient ability to reflect on and assess his own errors, which limits the opportunity for meaningful improvement from race to race. So they really didn't spare the blade from Marek Hanaszewski there. Lucas de Grassi, on hearing that it had been leaked by the teams and that, well, the teams were distancing themselves, said it was a letter to try and improve the sport. How could anyone complain about that? Which, as someone said in the comments, is a very de Grassi comment. But Oliver Rowland said, clearly, he said it's funny that it got to the press as soon as the teams found out, and clearly there's a rat somewhere. So, yeah, it was kind of amusing to hear the two very different approaches to the leaking of that letter. But yeah, so a letter sent from the drivers to the FIA president doesn't happen every week. And while Mohammed Ben Sulayem is not my favourite person, I think, it's interesting that they felt they had to go to him. Drivers have said privately to reporters that, they've tried talking and it's not worked. So this feels like something that's been in the brewing for, well, maybe ever since Gen 2, really, in Formula E.
When reading that letter, I really can't blame them, considering even this race being a classic example of a lot of what they were saying. De Vries's incident, for example, was one of the stupidest I've seen in a long time. Really did. You've put this in the notes, so I'm going to steal your joke. I'm so sorry, Sasha. It really did look like a Formula One, just multiplayer open lobby kind of move. He just went straight into the back of the guy. When you compare that to the likes of Taylor Barnard's incident, which was admittedly pretty over-aggressive, but ultimately just born out of that close elbows out racing that we've come to expect in Formula E, I don't see why Taylor Barnard's penalty was double De Vries's penalty, because De Vries got 5 seconds and Barnard got 10. I can't square that away in my mind. So when you look at the driver's comments on stewarding inconsistencies, you kind of have to, or at least I kind of, I can really, really appreciate and see where they're coming from. One thing does make me think, though, is in Formula One, they have the F1 Drivers Union Association. I don't know the specific term for it, but it is the Grand Prix Drivers Association, perhaps?
The GPDA, yeah.
Why does Formula E not have one of those? It's been around long enough now.
Well, so informally it seems they do, because de Grassi and Rowland are their reps. But I suspect the sad answer is because, the GPDA took someone to actually die for it to be formed. And I think Formula E, they've very much tried to work collectively on these things. So although Formula E and Formula One are similarly organised, I think, it's always been sold as a package. And maybe there's been a feeling that if drivers start unionising, then it may feel like people are not pushing in the same direction. I mean, I'm a firm supporter of unions. I represent my trade union at work, and I would say go for it if you can, but obviously there will be opposition from something that has been so collective up to now.
I think maybe we're starting to see the first inklings of it with this letter. Doesn't seem like the opposite of a collective approach, put it that way.
Well, yeah, and I think it's good that Formula E's drivers now feel powerful enough to actually go to the FIA with this kind of thing, because there would have been a time not so long ago when I think this would have been very hushed up and it would have been spoken about quietly in the steward's room, which maybe is how people would like it these days. When Dan Ticktum went public with his concerns and then supposedly drove all the way to London to meet Jeff Dodds in the office, Dodds did say, "We had a good chat, but I'd rather he kept it private next time." So I think that's generally the way Formula E likes to run things.
Well, in that respect, the letter kind of was private until it was leaked by the aforementioned rat. So maybe we'll find out who it was. Maybe we won't. I think it'll be really interesting if we do.
Interestingly, this may not have been the source of the leak, but, put two and two together. Drivers rep Lucas de Grassi did admit telling his team before sending it. So, maybe the rat in the kitchen is very much the one that we thought it was.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Wouldn't surprise me at all.
But yeah, so you can read those. Well, actually, you can't read the letter because they didn't publish it on the article, but you can read about that on therace.com and also motorsportweek.com. I'll put those links in the description. So you've put down here a word that I probably won't say because I want to make sure that it gets algorithmized on YouTube. But you said it was really poor qualifying from Jean-Eric Vergne and Mitch Evans compared to their teammates Nick Cassidy and Antonio Felix da Costa. So I think we can say that, yeah, I mean, Formula E has always been variable in terms of qualifying performances, but we are now seeing a gulf between teammates in terms of how they do in qualifying, and I'm wondering where that comes from, because it's not purely luck, is it? There is a tranche of drivers in Formula E this season who do seem to be on it every qualifying. I'd point out Mortara there. He was fifth this time again. There are a bunch of them who always seem to do okay, and there's a bunch, well, like Evans this time, who seem to struggle a bit and then make it up in the race.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of interesting to see. You have to go back to the usual comparison of Formula One, where when you see teammates so far off of each other in qualifying, you tend to question it as if it's a bit of an issue for the slower teammate. Certainly that's been the approach for a very long time towards Max Verstappen's teammates in Red Bull, is why can't they get close to him? The second Red Bull seat is cursed. All of those kinds of things to be said. But Formula E, it has long had that sort of that dynamic to it, where one teammate does generally seem to outperform in qualifying. While that doesn't necessarily hold true for the racing, you can have a really bad qualifying in Formula E, and with using attack mode strategically, you can cycle to the front and hopefully stay there. We saw that from Mitch Evans. He had a really bad qualifying. He was really towards the back and then came second in the end because he cycled forward well with the attack mode and used his energy well.
Yeah, and indeed, Mitch Evans finished second, so it has to be said that no matter how poor his qualifying was, again, he continues to deliver the goods in the race. It's worth talking about Nick Cassidy's race as well. I know that you would like to, but he came on the radio with about 2/3 of the race gone and said, how many of these guys have taken attack? And then the engineer responded, 3. And he was like, 3? Oh, and I just thought that summed up Cassidy's race, really.
Yeah.
It felt a bit like listening to one of the Ferrari drivers on the radio, and, sad Cassidy benefits no one.
Yeah, he just seemed defeated when he came over the radio like that, didn't he? And you can't blame him either. The strategy was bad from Citroën this race. And I think it just goes back to, we think of Citroën as a new team. It's not really a new team, considering that they took over the bones of the Maserati operation, but it does seem amateurish or a low level of strategic understanding there. And that's not necessarily from Nick Cassidy, because we know that he can run a delta. We know that he can save energy to the cows come home and keep everybody in the world behind him while he does it. But ultimately, if he doesn't get attack mode in a useful time in the race, everyone's going to blow by him. He's going to lose time and track position. And when he does come in for it eventually, he's not going to have enough energy left to really be able to use it. I don't know why they didn't cycle him back earlier. It was, don't get me wrong, it was fantastic to see him defending and keeping everybody behind him. It was great racing. He was managing the pack in a way that I think he felt annoyed by later in the race when he was begging the Cooper Kiers to go a bit faster. But ultimately, that's when you're leading early in the race, that is your job, is it to go as slow as possible while also keeping everyone behind you. Or cycle back and let someone else do that and you can try and save some energy. But I don't think the commentators made a good point about it when they said that he was out there for a very long time, the one that was cutting the hole through the air. And I think generally he had used about 2%, 1.5% more energy than everybody else around him. So maybe just would have been a better idea to cycle him back into around P5, P6, let him gain some energy, get the attack mode done after the pit boost, and just see where it came out. But yeah, I can't really give Citroen much applause for the strategy of this race. It was very sad to see how sad Nick Cassidy was, and nobody, as you say, nobody wants to see that.
On the other hand, plaudits again mostly for the strategy towards Jaguar. Now, this excludes the end of the race, obviously. So there was a battle for the lead. In the end, Evans muscled past Dan Ticktum on the final lap and got right up into the diffuser of Antonio Felix da Costa, his teammate. And at that point, and this is where I think the broadcast needs to have some responsibility. The broadcast did not tell us that he was being told to hold station. That's something that came out later on in reporting. And so all we heard was Evans being incredibly angry on the radio and saying, "Oh, look at that, terrible call." He didn't use the word terrible. Why should I be surprised? I think he said. And it seemed like it was in really mean spirit because we didn't know the full story. And then, Evans calmed down very quickly. He's generally a very genial guy, I think. And he even congratulated da Costa on the podium and sprayed some champagne on him. It can't have stung for that long, or at least maybe he felt he needed to direct his anger somewhere else. But this always happens in teams when you have two very competitive teammates. Jaguar have always gone for that. I think I can, knowing what I do now on Sunday when we're recording, I can see it from Evans' point of view. He's been on that team since the start. He came in as an FE rookie straight from Formula 2, and he has anchored that team just as they've allowed him to develop into the winningest driver in Formula E now. He has anchored that team and put them through a lot of organisational reshuffles and a lot of messes with their second driver, and he's been the one to rely on. I think any professional can say, well, I've been incumbent for a long time, and every time you hire a shiny new toy, you give them more than I do. And it's corporate frustration. I think anyone in an office will have felt that at some point. And I think it would be very easy to take da Costa's side and say, as I did yesterday, what on earth could Evans be moaning about? But I think I have a lot of sympathy with Mitch now. I think being told to hold station with half a lap to go just feels incredibly patronising, I would imagine.
Let them race. Let's not bring this papaya rules rubbish into Formula E. Formula E's, it's close racing. That's what it is. With half a lap left, that just feels anti-racing, if that makes sense, especially because they're teammates as well. I can absolutely understand the team's perspective of, we're in a really good position right now, just rear guard, keep the other guys behind, and we'll get this 1-2 squared away. But at the same time, it almost caused them to lose it because of how backed up they were towards the end.
Well, yeah, exactly. Honestly, they could have taken each other out, but I think on the final lap of the race, when you've got a driver significantly quicker, it felt like the wrong call to tell him to hold station, because da Costa would have beaten him anyway. Let's put it that way. Da Costa is probably the best defensive driver, or one of the best defensive drivers there is, unless the driver he's defending from is Jimmy Broadbent. And I think da Costa would have had that, but I don't think Mitch needed to be told to race safely.
No, absolutely not. It was almost a bit disrespectful, to be honest. You wouldn't be telling, I don't know. I would not be telling Mitch Evans how to race. Wouldn't be me.
Yeah, but again, Jaguar's on-track strategy team or on-the-wall strategy team seems to be the best that there is in Formula E. When you think that Envision, which is itself a decent operation, is running equal machinery, Jaguar getting everything out of both drivers, and they've so quickly mastered fast charging and the fact that it brings in pit stop strategy to Formula E. And I think we can't stop being impressed by generally the job that Jaguar's doing under Ian James now.
I think it sort of hallmarks over to a similar situation in Formula One between McLaren and Mercedes. Obviously, it's not equal machinery in terms of the chassis and the aero, etc. But how the Mercedes engine is used, because we see the Mercedes engine being leaps and bounds the best one in the field at the moment. But the McLaren isn't the second best car, despite being world champion from the year before. I think a lot of it comes down to how your organization works with the package that you have. And Jaguar just seemed to be maybe a cut above some of the other teams on the grid in terms of how they extract the maximum out of their package. You see this in every level of motorsport. That's what separates the top teams from the other teams, is they're the ones that are extracting 101% from their package, because they're allowing the drivers to be that mythical 1% extra, because they are actually finding 100% out of the car itself. They're giving the driver the best package possible, which is why we were able to see Mitch put on a performance like he did yesterday, coming from the back through the grid, so like a hot knife through butter, to be completely frank. Another driver that did that as well, just a small shout out for him, was Drugovich. I think he came from last to first, which was incredibly impressive. It was using attack mode, I will say, which it was a subject of another irk I had with Gemini AI, as later in the race it said, oh, Drugovich is going to take his attack mode in one lap, as if it had forgotten that there was only one activation in this race, and no one filtered that out in production.
But by the way, last to first in 8 laps, that must be some kind of record in any form of motorsport. I mean, even Senna didn't do that at Donington, but yeah, just on the Gemini AI point very quickly, I'm wondering if it's getting to the point where Google might want to pull the ads just because they're having enough trouble getting new users over to Gemini anyway. And if you want to prove that this is not just the future, but also the creation of digital friends, digital God, whatever, then I'm not sure putting out Karun Chantok level observations on screen is the way to do that.
Especially when they're just blatantly wrong. Why did no one in production filter that out? Why did no one go, oh wait, no, Drugovich took his attack mode really early, didn't he? He can't have a second one. Why are we putting that message on screen? You have to question the production team as well, to an extent. Like, yes, the AI came up with a terrible, objectively wrong statement. They didn't have to broadcast it. They could have just not shown it. But I don't know how it got through QC.
But another driver who I think will go away from Madrid feeling relieved and maybe a little satisfied is Pascal Wehrlein. He did everything that could have been expected of him, the Porsche driver. I think he's aware of what it takes to win a championship, obviously now, because he has. But I think he's aware that you're not going to win every race, but most drivers who've got the championship have got it through consistency over the years in FE. And the fact that he muscled past Ticktum for third place at the final corner, I just get a feeling that when we get to the final 2 rounds of the season, that points difference will make a difference. I think this will be a title won by 1 point or 2 points, not by 10 or 12 points, honestly. I think Wehrlein will be very pleased that he muscled past and got third at the final corner.
No, I completely agree. And I think that the opposite, or the same in a lot of ways, can be said of Nick Cassidy. I think this is going to be a really important points loss for him, for his campaign this year. I think when we get towards those last 2 or 3 races of the season, as you say, we're going to be looking at Cassidy's points total and thinking, if he had maybe even 12 more points, say, finished in P4, that's a lot more than he got for this race. Wehrlein, as I'm sure I've said before, incredibly consistent driver. He's always one of those drivers that sneaks up on you at the end of the season. You think, oh, you're you're a genuine title threat. Oh, that sort of came up from out of nowhere. Because you've been on the podium every race. Oh, okay, that explains it. He's just a bit of a sleeper cell in Formula E, if that makes sense to say for a world champion. But I think a lot of people still, or maybe even the coverage, still don't necessarily give him the credit he deserves for what a consistent racer he is. He's always going to be there or thereabouts at the end if you give him the package to do so, going back to how a team can extract the best out of their package. But Verline's an incredibly consistent driver, and I think we've said this after every race now, is I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the shot in the title fight at the end of the season, or potentially world champion at the end. There's 4 or 5 drivers still that could come out with the title at the end of this season. I think Nick's title is sort of starting to fall away, but it's not completely gone quite yet. But hopefully a bit of late season luck for him can bring it back. But I don't know. I personally don't really see it that much as I would love to see him get his first championship this year. I would also really love to see him drive a modern Formula One car, because I think his energy management skills would just be the measure of the field over there from Formula E. But that's a completely different kettle of fish altogether. He's made no statements whatsoever about any willingness to want to go over to Formula One or anything like that. So that is purely coming out of my head canon, as it were. I would love to see that. And similar to Max Verstappen, I'm hoping for a situation where we get someone that's so successful but so disenfranchised that they go somewhere else. Maybe we'll see Max and Nick swap. Who knows? I seem to doubt that for some reason, but I don't know why.
I think there's honestly more chance of seeing me in Formula E than Max Verstappen at some point soon. I think Max has made his brand very much anything bad in motorsport is Formula E to him.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Unfortunately, Ollie Behrman said a similar thing the other weekend. But what I did want to say to finish on Verline is he's also got the full backing of his team. I would assume when Nico Muller joined that team, having pulled up very few trees in Formula E prior, he kind of knew what was up there. They had moved on Da Costa, or allowed Da Costa to move on, and Muller was coming in. It felt a bit like when McLaren had Hamilton and Alonso, and then they had Hamilton and Kovalainen. Not that Nico Muller is a mediocre driver. He finished second in DTM twice in a row, but he's not Pascal Wehrlein's level. And I think when they swapped them mid-race because Wehrlein had the faster car, that was the kind of call that I think Jaguar would have struggled to make. It comes from having a self-aware driver who knows when he's coming in that he's not the strongest and that he may be asked to support. And there are very few drivers, I think, with the absence of ego willing to do that. Of course, Jaguar wouldn't sign Da Costa for a lot of money without allowing him to win, because this is Antonio Felix da Costa, former Formula E world champion we're talking about. I think that this was something that Porsche thought very carefully about.
I will say, unfair remembrance of Heikki Kovalainen there, the 8th fastest driver in the history of Formula One, if you believe the statistics. I'm sure he does, I will say. But no, I think it's, as you say, there's definitely a building around of Verline in that team. They know where their strengths lie, and I think that's one of the main reasons as to why the team has been reasonably successful over the past few years with him. It's that they know where they're putting their efforts when the chips are down. The second driver is a second driver. It's there who's there to support Verline. If the second driver can get a good result themselves, fantastic. If they can win some races, fantastic. But ultimately, it's there to push the guy that they know can win a championship to win another championship. Because why wouldn't you do that? That's what pretty much every team does, really. And we find that teams that have multiple world champions in them tend to get a little bit spicy with each other. We've seen that in all walks of motorsport, and all walks and all drives of motorsport. You only have to think back to Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg wrecking each other out of races less than 10 years ago now. And I think it's a wonder that we see not so much of that in Formula E, considering how close the racing is. So the fact that we can get teams where they really are all on the same page about that kind of driver ranking, as it were. As I say, I know Muller's probably does believe he's the best racer in the team. Maybe he understands that he isn't the one that's extracting the most out of the package. I keep going back to that, ultimately what it's about. You can be the greatest racer in the world, but if you're not extracting the most out of your car, it doesn't really mean much in the moment. You look at Max Verstappen at the moment in Formula One, it's not going that great. But if you look at him in his GT3 run in the Nürburgring, pole, win, less than 2 and a bit seconds off of the track record, was pretty dominant, even if he was later disqualified for exceeding tire allocation. I think it's good that we see this level of organization in Formula E, especially after earlier years where a lot of teams made some pretty silly mistakes. And arguably some teams do continue to make silly mistakes. Looking at you, Citroen.
I want to put a pin in Max Verstappen because we'll talk about him in a bit more depth in a moment.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, Captain Foreshadowing is in the room. But first of all, I wanted to close our comments on Jarama by just talking about how I think, and Formula E has always been, a victim of the cult of the chief executive. And it's not something that is only exclusive to motorsports. Think about WWE and think about the starring role that Vince McMahon gave himself over the years. But I think, in the early days of Formula E, you had Alejandro Agag always appearing in the winning team's garage when they won the race to celebrate with them. And I know Alejandro loved that. I know most of the FE viewers loved that. I questioned, well, is this meant to be about him? And I prefer a chief executive who takes a back seat. So therefore, I was a little alarmed to see Jeff Dodds as a studio pundit during the Evo sessions and on the podium. Now, he's the CEO of Formula E. He's allowed to do that. I think maybe the thinking is Stefano Domenicali does that because he's now become a bona fide star thanks to Drive to Survive, and because Formula One has grown to the level that probably even Stefano has to sign autographs these days or give selfies. But does it feel quite right when the chief executive of a sport that is still recovering from a disastrous pivot to pay TV and is still recovering its audience is celebrating like it's on top? I mean, love him or hate him, and most people hate him these days for justifiable reasons, Vince McMahon was the way he was because he knew WWE was the only show in town when it came to wrestling at that time. Apologies to WCW for a while. But I'm not sure Formula E can say that. And I think I would prefer, with respect to Jeff, that he was playing more of the role that Beth Peretta is playing and doing quiet stuff in the back to make sure that it's happening in the future at a continuously improving level. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I sort of agree with you to an extent. I think it's a thing that we see in a lot of American sports. For example, the commissioner of the MLB is a really public figure. The NFL commissioner is a really public figure, Not in the same way that we tend to expect from motorsports, in that, yes, sure, Ben Sulayem is a big public figure, but he's not really on the microphone every night making jokes about how Abu Dhabi 2021 was the start of a new era. That would be ludicrous, insane. And it doesn't really feel, as you say, it doesn't really feel particularly genuine when it comes from Formula E when Dodds is on the microphone there as well. Like, I don't know. I feel as a European, I'm going to use a reference here that you'll understand, Sasha. I feel like it would be more appropriate if they took the role of the head of the Eurovision Song Contest's planning council. We always see him opening the shows, then pretty much he shuts up and lets it happen. Generally I like that about him. There's a lot of problems with the Eurovision that I'm not going to get into, but
hashtag boycott Eurovision.
That one. But one of the things I have always enjoyed about it is that the executives, you don't really see them any more than you need to, They're the people that are in the offices doing what they should be doing in the offices. The people that are there to entertain are there to entertain. And I think maybe there's a bit of a spilling over of that in Formula E, where I would argue this is happening more widely in the FIA. There's a bit of a cult of personality or a cult of charisma going on at the moment, especially when you look at characters like Ben Sulayem. I said he wasn't that much of a public figure, but behind closed doors in the in those discussions with the governing bodies that he's a part of, he's very influential and seems to always get his way. So there has to be something there, you know. And ultimately, that's sort of the job that you expect of a chief executive of one of these organizations. It's to be the shadowy figure in the background that's keeping everything running. Shadowy figure in the background, sometimes a little bit more accurate a description than others, looking at you, Max Mosley, looking at you, Bernie Eccleston. But, you know, it does feel a bit theatre for the sake of theatre when really we should be focusing on the racing.
Yeah, and I'm not by any means saying chief executives can't have their fun. I just I think there is a sense of timing as to when they have that fun. Yeah, so let's pivot. Let's pivot to the ADAC. I'm going to try and get this right first time. Nürburgring Landstreckenserie, or NLS. This is the series that takes place exclusively on the old Nürburgring Nordschleife, and Max Verstappen, of course, went there this weekend to race in a Mercedes GT3 in something which, you know, having seen Max Verstappen in a Red Bull Ferrari last season and a Red Bull Mercedes this season, it feels incongruous and disconcerting, but still good for him. And this time he raced with, again, making me feel old, Jean-Marc Gounon's son and Danny Juncadella, former Formula E driver, and did all right. He won on the road, but then the team was disqualified for exceeding its tyre allocation, which you would think it might have noticed it had done. Now, I made the point in the pre-show notes, well, Ardac are always famous for, you know, being Jobsworths about these things. I pointed out the Aidan Millward video I'd seen about the Chrysler Vipers being constantly told to alter their engine because they were too powerful and they were creaming everyone in that series. But Georgie, you've got a different view.
Yeah, I do ostensibly agree with you. ADAC is a bit of a Jobsworthy organization when it comes to things like this. On this occasion, I don't think it was sort of unfair. I think that team made a mistake that was against the rules. Ostensibly, they broke the rules, whether it was by accident or on purpose. As we say with your tire tread in the UK, just ignorance is not an excuse for not abiding by the law. You know, you have to make sure that your tires are of a minimum tread. And in racing, you have to make sure you don't use too many tires. You know, it's really not rocket science, and it's not an insignificant advantage as well. More tires is more grip is more pace is more likely to win, and that car won. You know, so you could argue that it did have an impact on the car. I know they say it came from an infringement in qualifying where multiple drivers had to drive and the tires were changed multiple times. But my God, just put numbers on your tire blankets. It's not rocket science. This is set number 1. This is set number 2. This is set number 3. And you know what? Set number 6, leave them on the trailer. You're not allowed to use them anyway.
And of course, the reason why Max is there in the first place is because it's always been his dream to race, I believe, at the Nordschleife. He's made points in the past about preferring sports cars to Formula One, but he knows where the big money is, and he knows Formula One is the place where you go if you possibly can and if you have the ability. So I think it's always been on the cards. You know, bearing in mind he's in his 12th season of Formula One, I think now, having started in 2015. I mean, that's as many seasons that's more seasons than Ayrton Senna got. So he's moving into senior driver territory, even though he's so young. So I don't think we should be too shocked if, as people have suggested many times, he retires early and, you know, goes to endurance racing. But is it also a sign of the times? I mean, we've talked about Formula E being prime racing right now and being thoroughly enjoyable. Formula One's tried to make itself as enjoyable as Formula E while not sacrificing the technical spectacle. And I don't think they've quite got the formula right yet. So this new version of Formula One, it's been called various words, but let's call it in rubbishification. The idea that when private equity takes over something, it becomes worse because the product is diluted and you try and get more out of the same. And people have talked about fake racing, which of course was a charge they levelled at Formula E when attack mode came in. Is it just the case that people are going to get used to this, like they got used to Formula E having attack mode and fan boost? And is it going to be something we don't talk about in 4 years when they inevitably go to V8s? Or by then, will all the best drivers have scarpered because it's just not good racing?
I think it's probably the former. Honestly, the racing's been enjoyable the first couple of rounds. As someone that doesn't care that much about Formula One, hasn't really watched it that much the last few years, at least since the old Abu Dhabi 21 debacle, it was good. The racing was good, and even over the radio, some of the drivers seemed to be enjoying it as well. In China, Charles lost out in a battle to Lewis and still came over the radio. So that was pretty fun, you know? So whatever Max Verstappen thinks about whether this is real racing or not, doesn't necessarily seem to be the reflective of the views of the whole. And this is a thing with Max Verstappen. He does tend to seem to think that his opinion is the one that everybody has, and he does tend to speak authoritatively in that respect, where perhaps he shouldn't be, because he's speaking for millions of different people that have different views from him. But, you know, who am I to question how open or closed-minded a racing driver is when it comes to these things? The famously focused and pointed individuals, you can't really expect much different from a lot of them. That not everyone can be Sebastian Vettel in his old age, you know what I mean? But yeah, when it comes to that sort of energy management style racing, I think it's been good. One of the things that people tend to underestimate about Formula One is we say that they've diluted the technicality of it in ways, but one of those Formula One cars could power my house for a week running 2 race distances if they were super clipping. The amount of electrical regeneration that those cars do is absolutely ridiculous. I can't remember the exact statistics, but I think we worked out in the Prismatic Discord at one point that the amount of energy those cars generate over the course of a race, if you were to take all of them, you could probably power an average UK house for a couple of weeks. That's insane. When we talk about how technical Formula One is, it still is. It's still at the cutting edge of technical performance. And when we see how fast these cars are on the straights compared to the previous ones, they're only going to get faster in the corners as they figure out how to make the cars more efficient. They're only going to get faster on the straights as they figure out how to make the cars more efficient out of corners, and how to maximize energy out of the track. You know, the same can be said of Formula E. It's just the way that they're going to have to learn to race. Eventually they'll get used to it, and much like push to pass in any other series that has push to pass, it'll become a thing of the past to even worry about it. They've been joking about it being like Mario Kart when you get the mushroom, but you know, that adds a tactical element to the sport. You have to conserve your energy, you have to use it tactically. For a long time, people have been complaining about how Formula One has a lack of strategy now, because the only thing that really has anything to do with that is tires, and the tires are primarily down to how the drivers use them in the first place. It's not really that strategic when you take the likes of fuel weight and things out of it. But I think it's good to see some strategic elements brought back into racing like that. I don't think that is what people have been, or certainly what Max Verstappen has been claiming it is a lack of racing. If anything, we've seen the cars be able to follow each other closer than they have been for a very long time, and really, really keep there. No, if anything, I'm a fan of the new style of racing. I don't think it's the term that you used at all. I think we're moving in the right direction. We're certainly not all of the way there, but we're making strides, is what I would say.
So let's finish off with your and my happy place sim racing, endurance sim racing. So we're going to talk about the Race to a Cause 2026 final round from the Circuit of the Americas, and then we're going to talk about Race for a Cause 24. So Georgie, you were driving, so maybe it's best that you talk us through. I'm just going to sit back in my pink swivel chair here and listen to you talking about your race, and also, you know, what it was like generally, the atmosphere for the sim race at the Lone Star 6 hours there.
It was a pretty strong race for my team. I say my team because this was the first round of a Road to a Cause that I actually had a teammate, because this was the 6-hour event rather than the other 2 rounds being 4 hours at the Circuit of the Americas. I drove with one of my teammates, Shuggy, who was driving with Ivory in Prismatic Minerva for the other portion of the season. But Ivory had to work her day job, so unfortunately, rather than having both teams sit out, me and Shuggy decided we would join forces to do the race together. And I will say she did a lot better than me. She led the opening portions of the race in class. We were driving in the LMP3 category, just put together a really fantastic race. And then I got in, and I'm just not as fast as her. It wasn't a bad race for me. I'm just not as fast as her, so I wasn't able to hold on to the positions. I think we ended up finishing position 4 in the end, which was where I'd finished, I think, every round. So it was perfectly par for the course for me. She was very happy with the result. I think she enjoyed racing, tossing it up at the front, and the Who Wants a Soda cars were just really, really strong. They have been all season. We compromised it a bit for tire wear because the tire wear situation at Circuit of the Americas was pretty dire. For Shuggy, I will say I'm a bit of a tire whisperer in that I'm just not really utilizing them to the full extent that I can anyway, which is why I'm not as fast as Shuggy, as I'm not taking as much out of my tires because I'm just not using them as much. But as a result of those compromises in the setup, I think we maybe lost a little bit of outright pace, but it probably wasn't outright pace that I could have used anyway. So if anything, it kept her more consistent to be able to have better tires later in her stint rather than to be able to push really, really aggressively earlier in the stint and then have to manage them later. All part of that strategy that we were going back to. But when it's a 6-hour long race, tire strategy like that really does matter because it can become the thing that limits your stint length. Rather than having to pit for fuel, you might have to pit for tires. And that's not really a situation you want to be in. You want to be in the situation of running your car as long as it possibly can, which that is always dictated to by the fuel. So if your tires are forcing you to come in early, you're sort of just losing time, really. And we managed to avoid that, which was probably the greatest victory of the race for us. We managed to manage our tires quite well and not have to worry about them throughout the 6 hours. So I think that was probably the main take home for us. It was a good tire management race, and a lot of good preparation for the 24-hour, the race for a cause, as you say.
And obviously we talked about how well prepared Who Wants a Soda have been in the last pod. They're a team of VTubers, and they came in with absolutely the right strategy for every single one of those races. But of course, race for a cause 24, which is the 24 hours at Le Mans on Easter weekend, will be a different challenge because you will have LMP3 competitors such as them having to compete in a different category. Now, registration's open at the moment, and not all of the teams that we've seen in race to a cause might compete, but we're obviously hoping that most of them do, and we're hoping to get a few different ones in. I had hopes to form a team, then I realised just how difficult it is already being a day jobber and a freelance worker, and I decided to just sponsor the thing instead, or co-sponsor it and enjoy watching. So it's been a pleasure commentating, and I obviously hope to be involved as a sim driver or team owner in the future. But I think for now it's just going to be nice to sit back and relax and enjoy the excellent sim racing. But tell us about Race to a Cause, any Race for a Cause anyway.
You mean Road to a Cause?
No. So tell us about registration for Race for a Cause. So how long is it open for, and how many places do you have left?
So the registration will be open pretty much until a few days before the race, if anyone wants to register that late. I know it's a 24-hour race, so it's not really a lot of people's idea of planning, but if you want to register that late, you can. Well, if the grid isn't full. At the moment, we're getting towards 40 teams, so there's still maybe if we want to go to the maximum amount of cars that iRacing will allow in a session, there's maybe 20 spaces left, but I think the most amount of teams we've had for road race for a cause, I'm doing it now, it was 51 last year, so we've got a couple of weeks to try and get a few more teams to get towards that. But on retention alone, as I say, we're hitting towards that 40, and that's been fantastic to see a lot of those teams from Road to a Cause join in for the 24. I said my own my own team struggled to field all of its entries for the end of Road to a Cause because one of our drivers had to work and it was a 6-hour race. So that made significant difference to the amount of drive time that a solo driver would have to do. 6 hours, a lot more time than 4 hours. I know it's only 2 more hours, but when you're in the cockpit on your own for that amount of time, it feels a lot longer. So I know a lot of teams have had to combine entries to be able to get to the grid for Race for a Cause. One of the teams you mentioned, Who Wants a Soda, they're one of those teams that have had to combine their driver rosters to be able to make it work for a Race for a Cause. But even in that respect, we still have towards 40 teams. So that's been fantastic to see that our community is really coming out in force to support us. There are 3 Savage Sim Racing teams. That's another one of our event partners. It's fantastic to see so many of them on the grid, supporting the event in more than just being an event partner, actively supporting the grid. And that's 3 donations for the charity as well, as that's how entries are secured for the series. Fill out our Google form, and so we know who you are, we know what car you're running, etc. Then pay your €20 to the charity via our Tiltify campaign, and that's your entry secured. First come, first served in that respect. And the main goal of all of this is raising as much money as we possibly can for Belong To, LGBTQ Youth Ireland, which is our supported charity for this year. They're back from last year because we just loved working with them so much, and we thought, why stop a good thing, or to use a term from the casinos, let it ride. We had a good show last year, so why not try and put it on again this year? We raised last year €6,100 roughly, so we're hoping to beat that, but obviously it's a slightly tougher economic time at the moment, so we're not under any false pretenses of anything like that. Just if you can donate, please do. They do fantastic work, and this is why we've chosen to support them again. We just trust that every penny that we give them is going to be put towards something very useful for people of our community, of the LGBTQ plus community. And as one of my uncles would say, it's for the bairns, it's for the kids. You can't get mad about raising money for the kids. So it's hard enough being LGBTQ plus in the modern climate. I can only imagine how hard it is to be an LGBTQ plus kid nowadays. So I think raising money for services that support them it's a good thing, and that's why we're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And watching the very emotive event last Monday from Transmission at Wembley Arena just made me realise how few events I'd seen that actually united the LGBTQ plus community and also asked allies to be publicly supportive. And not putting these 2 events on any similar pedestal, but I think it's really nice to be involved in something where people are doing what they enjoy, which is racing, but they're doing so for a cause which they can be proud of as well.
No, I've always said of the Race for a Cause community that I'm so proud of not just the event that we've built, but of the community that we've built around that event. Everyone there loves everything about it. And even the members of ostensibly it's an LGBTQ plus safe space, right? You can't really compete in Race for a Cause and have opinions that are untowards about LGBTQ plus people, or rather you could. You just have to also have a relatively large amount of cognitive dissonance to allow it, if you know what I mean. But the way that every team is supportive of each other on track and off track has always struck me as just fantastic about the Race for a Cause community. Ostensibly everyone's there to race, but everyone's aware that there is something that joins us together outside of the racing, and that's that, to paraphrase Sebastian Vettel, there's still a race to win. There's still work to do, and we can use our platforms as sim racers to try and move the Overton window, to try and move the envelope of opinion towards acceptability. And this is one of the things I've said about Prismatic outside of Race for a Cause, is not to claim credit, but we absolutely are a part of why sim racing is a more accepting environment than it was only a few years ago, because we have carved out that space. Other teams are following our example now. When we first started, we put a post up on Reddit to try and gain some traction, and the responses to it were disgusting. It was shut down by the Reddit mods of the iRacing subreddit, basically with the closing comment of, "We're closing this. We're so disappointed in so many of you." But nowadays, we see teams being launched in that iRacing subreddit only recently. The response is overwhelmingly different. There's so many people that are happy to see it happen, and so many people that are just openly trying to join the team while it's advertising itself on Reddit in this way, which wasn't really what we got, as I say, 5 years ago, as it's the 50-year anniversary of Prismatic this year. It's been fantastic to see that shift, and Race for a Cause ultimately serves that purpose as well as raising money for Belong To. It carves out a space in sim racing, so LGBTQ plus sim racers know that it is a space for them, which is why it's so important for us to have it operate the way that it does, in the sense of it being a first come first served, not mediated by skill level. It's about the community coming together more than it is about the competitive element of it. Obviously that is a large element of it, and I'll go back to that we have prizes in a moment, but ultimately the race is there to serve the purpose of being a flagship event for the community, and I think it achieves that. But I mentioned a moment ago that we've got prizes this year. We had a prize last year. It was a Next Level Racing HF8 haptic feedback seat cover. That's a bit of a mouthful, I will say. And that was a prize for our raffle. And you could enter the raffle by donating, much the same as if you wanted to enter a team. But raffle donation was €15 rather than 20. We're keeping that for this year. So if you want to enter the raffle for any of the things that I'm about to mention, €15 donation to our Tiltify campaign for the Race for a Cause. Your way for you to be identified into the note so that we can figure out who you are. And towards the end of the race, we'll conduct a raffle and see who wins. The 2 and a bit prizes that we have for the raffle so far are a pair of Husinkfeld Sprint. It's the 2-pedal pair, with a fantastic prize. To be honest, I really want to win them myself, so I might put a couple of entries in for that. Other than that, we have a Sprint folding cockpit from GT Omega, which if anybody doesn't have anything to bolt their rig to other than their desk, that could be a fantastic addition to their, or a fantastic expansion to their rig, as it were, or a start for their rig. We also have another NLR HF8 haptic feedback seat cover, but that's coming from an organization called End-to-End Motorsports rather than directly from NLR. End-to-End Motorsports are another one of our event partners. I will say all of these prizes, they can only be shipped to places that aren't restricted, so difficult to dance around this. If your country's actively at war at the moment, we probably can't send it to you unless it's in the United States, because no comment, Chef.
Glad about that.
Not touching that one with a barge pole, but ostensibly yes. If we can post it to you, you'll get it if you win. Other than that, we have another prize, and this is a slightly more competitive prize for the fastest lap. The driver that gets the fastest lap in each class, there is a pair of Prismatic Motorsports gloves up for grabs, just as a nice little tip of the hat to the fastest driver in each class this year, to encourage a little bit of friendly competition, not just between teams, but inside of teams too. Why not?
And if you do happen to decide to purchase any Prismatic Motorsport merch, you might notice a familiar name on the sleeve. I've been so happy to be featured on Prismatic merch for a while. So go and donate to Tiltify when it comes to Race for a Cause 24. Essentially, the backstory is Prismatic wanted to share the load of getting the broadcast deal together, so they asked me if I would like to help and have some sponsorship as part of the broadcast. So my business venture, examcoach.support, which is, I'm an English teacher. I have been for more than 12 years. I've been getting people through school exams. And if you happen to be a young person or a not so young person who wants to get through the 3 or 4 accredited English exams, we're talking about Cambridge, IELTS, European Baccalaureate, International Baccalaureate, I can help you, and I host workshops, and I host webinars, and I host one-to-one lessons. So I'll be putting together an ad read for that, but I definitely don't want to detract or distract at all from the main cause, which is Belong to Ireland. And I will be donating from my own pocket to that, and I very much hope that anyone who has a spare £1 or a spare euro or a spare penny can do so. Also, something else to say: if you're a trans person, Tiltify doesn't require you to name your legal name in the donation, so you can put whatever you want your name to be on screen. And it's just lovely to get donations through, isn't it, Georgie?
It's fantastic. Honestly, every single donation that comes through, I get a notification, and it's justification that we're doing the right thing for the charity. To be completely transparent, the charity has helped out with the broadcast costs as well. They funded about 15% of the broadcast. And I will say, they've already made 100% of that back from what we've raised so far in the campaign. It feels like we're going in the right direction. It feels like we're going to do a really good job for them this year. And yeah, I just can't wait for the main event. I will just briefly mention the only other sponsor that hasn't been brought up so far, which is Multiviewer. If any of you have, any of the listeners, any of the viewers have a F1 TV subscription, it's a fantastic way to keep up with the races live. You can view cockpit cams from every single driver. You can view their transcripts. It's a really powerful tool if you are the kind of person that likes to watch every single aspect of a Formula One race while it's happening. I know I used to be like that. I've been a little bit detached from Formula One in recent years, but certainly when I first started university in the years gone of 2013, I was watching every session of Formula One, of Formula Two, of Formula Three, trying to take in as much content of it as I possibly could. And if you're that kind of person, Multiviewer is absolutely what you need to be getting into. Just works with your F1 TV subscription. It's free. You can choose to support them if you want to, but ostensibly it just worked with your F1 TV subscription. So if that's a thing you already have, it's something that you can already be using.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a fine way to wrap up. And thank you, Georgie Mackay, again for taking part in this motion racing podcast. We looked back at Jarama and the drama there, but we're looking forward now. And with Formula E taking a break in April, there'll be plenty of content about sim racing and also some about real-life sports car racing. So something to look forward to there. And thank you all for listening or watching. Don't forget to subscribe, bang the bell, give us a like if you want on YouTube, give us a comment if you want to be nice, and don't forget to also rate and comment on the podcast platforms. We do appreciate your support. You know, we're coming back after quite some time off, and it's been really heartening to see the numbers coming up and to see people staying on and people listening to the show, no matter what gap there is between FE races. So thank you so much, and we'll have another edition for you very soon. All the best, and bye for now.